All right, I'm with Codie Sanchez, the author of a brand new book, Main Street Millionaire. Now, Codie is familiar to me. I don't know if she's unfamiliar to you, but you have hit my algorithm, and you've probably hit everyone listening's algorithm. If not on IG, then on YouTube. And the way that you hit my attention, Codie, is by talking about stuff like this. You were talking about small businesses, business advice, not sort of hitting the esoteric home run of creating the next big app, but buying the laundromat, starting the brick and mortar business.
Yeah, well, the idea kind of came from just being in private equity for a long time, which we thought was super fancy. When you think about private equity or Wall Street, I think you think here, New York, big, huge skyscrapers. But actually, what do people do in private equity? They buy really old, long-standing, stable businesses that cash flow. And at some point, after working for a boss I didn't like for a long time, I realized, wait a second, why couldn't I do the same thing that they do, but at the smaller level, like an everyday human level? And so I started looking for businesses that didn't take a rocket scientist to run. One of them was a laundromat. And then I found out about things like the SBA and how you can get third-party loans to buy businesses. And so it started for me personally. And then I started seeing this weird creep. I mean, we call it kind of the corporate mist of these big companies coming in and buying everything. And the rest of us either have to buy from them or work for them. And that's when I was like, we probably shouldn't get rich quietly. We should try to get rich together. We should tell more people about how to buy these Main Street businesses. Otherwise, they go away.
There's two sides to what I hear you talking about that appeal to me. One is sort of the self-interest of what you get out of being involved in these small brick and mortar businesses. But the other is what you give back. I actually want to start with what you give back because I'm from a small town, 30,000 people, 1 hour north of Dallas. People have written books about this for a decade, the small town brain drain, that so much of the talent from towns across America, from Nebraska to Texas, wherever it may be, move off to the big city. And what you're talking about is not just building something that gives back to you potentially financially, which I want to get into, but helps rebuild Main Street, helps rebuild these communities in these small towns.
Yeah, well, I think we're waking up to the point that it's not that fun working in a cubicle for 8 hours a day, skipping the sun all day. It's bizarre, actually, when you think about it. Where else are there padded walls except a psych ward? Why did we decide that this would be the life that we wanted to live and that this would make us happy? Vitamin D deficient, clacking away on keyboards, sort of neck scrunching, back hurting, in rolly chairs with a bunch of people that we don't actually want to hang out with and bosses that we don't want to look like eventually. And so, when you feel that, I actually heard Tucker Carlson say, truth is like a tuning fork. When you hear it, you feel it. And I remember the first time I started feeling that myself, I was working at Goldman and thinking, I hate this. I hate what I'm doing in this moment. And so, yeah, there is that self-interest of going and doing the next thing. But I think there's also this rising realization that we were sold a bit of a lie, that us going to work for a corporate person for our whole lives maybe is not as intriguing as we thought. So I think there's an opportunity for the first time ever for youth to stay in their hometowns. We did a study, actually. Study is a loose term. We polled about 30,000 people across Instagram and our X account and saw how many people had become successful. And what I mean by successful is a millionaire, right? Without counting your house, successful that had never left their hometown, even for college. And we found one person.
Really?
Yeah. And increasingly, we're seeing, more young people living away from their families, moving away from their towns. And I think there's a chance now where the best jobs actually aren't in big corporate centers like New York anymore. The best jobs might be you taking ownership in a 65-year-old retiring boomer's business and bringing technology and a little bit of hustle to an old school business like your local landscaping company or a roofing company. And so that's my belief that if we don't do this, one, we won't be happy individually. We'll be stuck in cubicles working for somebody else, and eventually we'll realize that doesn't make us happy. And then two, our main streets will be owned by huge corporations or they'll be empty. And we only have to look to Japan to see that that is not a future we want.
So I love the outcome of this for the community. I can picture all these talented individuals helping rebuild businesses, which eventually rebuilds a town. And now you have all these leaders in these towns who are invested in the community. But at first, we have to sell the individual on staying in that town. So explain to me, let's take an example. Give me, it can be a theoretical example, but put some flesh on it of how someone, a young person, could stay in their own hometown community and become a millionaire.
Yeah. Let's use an example. A guy by the name of Clint, actually. He is also in Texas. Ugh, I can't remember the name of the town, but a town that's so tiny that he doesn't have an airport for a couple hours from him. He now has his own plane that he flies in when he comes to see me in Austin or Dallas. Not a huge plane, but like a nice plane, you know? And Clint is a business broker and bought into a local gardening business in his small town. This gardening business does like landscaping, planting, right? And because of this, Clint
How big is this in this scenario? How big is this gardening landscaping business that he buys into?
now it's big. I don't want to, doing millions of dollars a year, maybe getting up to 8 figures,
Okay.
but definitely millions.
Now,
Yeah. And, what's interesting about Clint is he has a couple kids. If you were to see his backyard, there's probably more deer than people than you're going to see around there. And a really smart guy. But he has decided that he wants to stay in the local community, but still make a bunch of money. And then if he wants to leave, he can fly in and fly out. But sometimes it's also underrated, I think, to be really important and needed in a town. When I think so many people come to a big city like New York and you're a number, you get lost.
right.
And so for somebody to feel like they know you, they want to do you a favor because they're going to see you again next week, I think that's what humans actually need.
So I want to ask you another couple questions about
Yeah.
Clint. But first, here's a parenthetical, but it fits in. You have this part of your book, which I really find fascinating. You talk about, we need to talk about money again.
Let's do it.
You said like 1 in 4 people didn't grow up talking about money or do. What is it? Like people are embarrassed to talk about money.
Yeah, most of us do not talk about money.
That's not how I grew up.
Yeah,
But
you talked about money growing
Yeah,
up?
absolutely.
Wow.
But
like who? Your mom or dad?
yeah,
Do they
absolutely.
talk about making it or saving it?
I knew what my dad made. I knew when he had a big year. My dad was an attorney and he talked.
Yeah.
But I actually really appreciate it in retrospect because I wasn't ignorant about money. Like, what is a lot of money? What's not a lot of money? What's a good year? What's a bad year? My wife, on the other hand, her family was very traditional and conservative about money. They didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think that leaves a lot of people in the dark. Like I know it's uncouth or impolite to talk about money, but I think it leads to a lot of ignorance.
Oh, I think you're right. I kind of go back to, I remember I was talking to one of my friends who was schooling me on something. You know how we all grew up and we said money is the root of all evil,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't know how we got programmed that, but we all sort of know it. And then if you go back and look in the Bible, it's actually the love of money or the desire for money, depending on the translation, is the root of all evil. So it's not the money that is the issue. It is that all you want? Is that the thing that is the driving force for you? Then that is evil.
Right.
But I think we were sold sort of this bag of goods about money for a myriad of reasons, but because we're a lot easier to control and we don't have it. The ultimate form of freedom is financial freedom because it allows you to push your will onto the world as opposed to be pushed upon. And I knew that firsthand because I spent a lot of time along the U.S.-Mexico border. And I saw what happened to young women with a last name like Sanchez who were brutalized and murdered along the U.S.-Mexico border, and nobody cared, Will. I mean, I'm talking 2,000 people a year died in Juarez last year, the town that I was in. Were murdered, didn't die. 2,000 were murdered. And why? It wasn't that they were Mexican and I was American. It was really that they didn't have socioeconomic power. They were poor. And so nobody really cared. They had no recourse. So I think we have to talk about money. And it's really good that your dad did that because I think we think it's unsophisticated or it's scammy or it's lowbrow.
Right.
And it's not. It's putting the hand down as opposed to, kind of saying we're above it.
Yeah. And so in that spirit, I think going back to Clint in the landscaping business, one of the problems for attracting people to stay back in their hometown or invest in Main Street and businesses is that while it might be good for the community, they have to be sold on how it's good for them individually. I asked you about the size of the landscaping business.
Yeah.
Because when you're in a small town, what you worry about is scale.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I can buy into this business and I can perhaps improve it with technology and hustle, but how big can I actually make it in this small community? Can I actually become a millionaire doing this, whatever it may be, plumbing, roofing, in this small town community? Do I have scale?
Yeah, well, I think that there's two sides to the equation of making millions, right, or becoming a millionaire. One is revenue or profit or making money. The other side is expense and spend, right? And so I have another one of our group and a friend of mine whose name is Nick, and he lives in Georgia. And Nick is a great example. He went to he either went to Yale or he went to Cornell. And that's a very nice school. And instead of going to consulting or, Goldman Sachs afterwards, like I did, he actually started a self-storage company. And the self-storage was basically him and some friends grabbing a bunch of people's stuff during the summer and putting it in a storage unit that they subletted out, right? That self-storage business ended up leading him to buy a small self-storage property. But obviously he couldn't do that by Cornell. The property was really expensive. He had to go back to his hometown. Well, here's the good part about it. I think his first property was like 100 or 200K. And yet his first house that he bought there was like 200K, and it's a beautiful house with his kids. So the guy now also does really well, but it's because it's so much cheaper to start there and you can become an owner. And I think what we have to stop thinking about is like, not to get super technical, but it's not just about how much you make. It's how much you keep. One, from the government, and two, when you don't have to spend a ton. So when you are in an owner category, like you own a small business, your write-off potential is almost limitless for what you can write off in the business. When you are an employee, I mean, you know this all too well, you could make tons at Fox. But if you're domiciled in New York and if you are a W-2 employee, you have basically no write-off ability.
Right.
And so $1 million very, quickly becomes 500K. Whereas if you're an owner and you make 500K in your business, but you have write-offs, you might actually keep more than somebody who makes $1 million in New York. So we got to reframe how we think about becoming a millionaire, I think, too.
When you went down this path, I mean, I know you talked about you were in private equity, Goldman,
Yeah.
you saw these opportunities, which, by the way, we should note, like, private equity is investing in these exact type of
That's right.
businesses today. They're
right.
buying veterinarian offices. They're buying plumbers. I have a brother in construction, so I know they're beginning to play in all types of manufacturing. It's like what you're telling us is something that we should have known about and might have a little bit. I mean, there was a famous book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad that talked a lot about this, specifically about laundromats, but also that we can see happening in the economy right now. Like, it's a reinvestment in real business.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you look at investment options, right? All the way from stocks to bonds to hedge funds. What we know over any 10-year period of time, on average, private equity outperforms 15% on average versus, let's say, 10 in the stock market, 2 or 3 with bonds. Okay, if that's the case, then we want to see what the guys are doing who make the most money consistently over time. And oh, by the way, they are also more prevalent on the Forbes 100 list than any other asset class, save people handing down money in their family, like the Waltons. And so when I saw that, I was like, wait a second. If all these guys are doing is what do they basically do? They buy these boring businesses that exist for a long time that cash flow. They use other people's money to do it, which they use the word leveraged buyout, right? LBO. They go raise a bunch of money from friends or they go get a bunch of money from banks. And then they buy this business and they cash flow off of it. And that turns itself into their paycheck. Well, what they've sort of done that's fascinating to me is they've made it seem like that is normal and okay for institutions, but for people to do it individually, it's not. And so I'm pushing back on that, which is why I get into it a lot with private equity guys. I don't have any problem with them. I think they're some of the smartest people I've ever met, and they serve a purpose in the world. But private equity companies owned 4% of U.S. companies in 2000. In 2020, 20% of companies. If you work in a company right now in the US, you have a 1 in 7 chance to be working for a private equity owned company right now. I do not think it is good when we have such centralization of ownership in the US.
And they're going into these intimate small town community businesses as we speak. So I worry about all of these, whatever they are, landscaping businesses or veterinarian offices that are no longer owned local, but they're being rolled up in some massive national private equity buyout of whatever your given industry.
Yeah, and you know what it does? As touchy-feely as it sounds, it takes the soul right out of the company.
Yes.
I mean, we all know, my team jokes about it a lot, but at our companies, you're allowed to go, and if you want to buy coffees or food or whatever while you're working, you're allowed to do that as long as it's for a small business. You're not allowed to go to Starbucks. And the reason is because the last time you went to Starbucks, what did you get? I mean, probably the best Starbucks are in like New York because, just volume. But when you go to a Starbucks in almost any other town, it's like, it's dirty. It's definitely not the third place anymore. They don't write your name correctly on the thing. They barely wish you were there, right? There's no communicating with them. The owner of the company has never been in that building, and it feels the same anywhere you go. There is no soul. And so, to me, why we like special Main Street communities is because they were localized. And now we're kind of like slowly pulling the soul out of communities. But for the first time ever, I think we have a way to push back, which is that we can have more of a soul and we can also keep more money in our local economies by buying these businesses. Shop local didn't work because Amazon's so easy and amazing. Like, of course, I'm going to use that instead of shop local. But experience a local coffee shop versus a Starbucks, yeah, that might work. And so I think that this is our opportunity with these small businesses.
So I would ask my two sons
Yeah.
to read this when the time is right. One's 16, one's 13.
Love
But
it.
they're getting there
Yeah.
because they're going to start thinking about what they want to do. And I guess as a father, I want them to do real things. And it's hard because of what I do for a living. And what I do for a living, often it looks like, hey, go become famous or a star. That's not what I think everybody kind of now has this idea that that's a great career.
Yeah.
That's not what I want for my sons.
Yeah.
I would love to look up one day and you own like a very successful drywall business. Like I would be really excited about that because it's real. You can see your thumbprint on something. But I also like that you talk about specifics. So like I know there's some that you like and some that you don't like as far as when it comes to businesses that make you a Main Street millionaire.
Yeah, let's talk about some businesses I hate, and people can yell at us on the internet
Okay.
for that.
All right.
So a couple businesses that I think are masquerading as a business, but really something else. My least favorite business, hotels. Super hard. Do you know most hotels make negative margin? So the only way they actually make money is through tax benefits. So hotels are like a 24/7 problem that are really hard to run over time. So it's amazing that people run them. Thank God people do it. I love staying in them. But for a first-time entrepreneur, don't do a hotel. It's a super hard business. Second, restaurants. Everybody thinks that they should open
Right.
a restaurant if they like to cook. Let me tell you what. Go eat there and don't profit off of it. And if you don't believe me, like read Anthony Bourdain's book too. He's like, all I have seen is a graveyard of enthusiasts in the restaurant space. You have to be a sort of crazy, obsessed savant, I think, to long-term succeed in restaurants. It's really hard. Now, if you are obsessed with just about any business, you could probably win, but restaurants have really small margins and they're complex. So I don't play that game. And then the third business that I don't love, and then I think a lot of people think about these days, I'll just encapsulate them overall in like fast internet businesses. So I don't love Amazon drop shipping. You have no moat. I don't love e-commerce flipping. You don't have ability to have a real product and brand to talk to people about. So those are three businesses that I'm like, maybe not for your first go.
By the way, you just described the moat. I know what you mean by the moat.
Yeah.
No protection against competition.
Exactly.
This was one of the reasons when I first got into this, Codie. I don't know why I'm sharing with you my story
Oh,
though.
yeah, I want to know.
No, I bought small town newspapers in Texas.
Whoa.
I read the biography of Warren Buffett, who I think is probably at least intellectually in the spirit of something you would appreciate. Codie Sanchez, a mainstream millionaire, value businesses, and he used to invest in newspapers.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons he invested in newspapers is that they have a moat. By the time we'd arrived there in the early 2000s, it was already declining businesses, circulation declined, but you're pretty much down to a one newspaper town. You know, there was a time when it was two. New York still is a multiple newspaper town, but you had one newspaper with 100 years of brand equity built up. And so it had a moat for customers. Now, we didn't see this coming along. We did. We did see it coming along, and that's why I went to small town weekly newspapers, which were the last adopters of giving up newspapers. But
Interesting.
that was my Main Street start to ended up where we are today.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because they still kind of exist in a different way. Like some of the businesses we buy are online businesses. I don't like to talk about those as much because I think other people talk about buying and selling online businesses, so it's more normalized. But for young people that are like, I'm not sure where I want to stay forever. Could I do a little tiny acquisition? We've done a couple examples of acquisitions of newsletters. Like I sold one called Grow Getters, which was like, I think we sold it for like $8,000, like very reasonable for somebody. And it was a little newsletter that was a marketing newsletter that you could, teach people how to market. And so I think your daily newspapers went to weekly newspapers, went to Substack newsletters and now Beehive.
Right.
And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future, though. I think we invested in one Canadian series of small town newspapers that's actually doing pretty well.
Oh, this is a terrible business.
Yeah.
That we're in. No, that we're in. Media.
Media?
Right.
Yeah.
I think the only thing we've ever learned over the last 20 years is how to destroy legacy media that had moats, but not really how to build new things in its place.
Yeah.
Now, I should say, this is fine for people like yourself to build your own business. What's hard to imagine is any type of new scale.
Yeah.
You see what I'm getting at? Like,
Totally.
we've torn down everything that's tried to rise up to replace media, whether or not it was BuzzFeed or Vice or anything.
Yeah.
They collapsed under their own weight of hype.
Yeah.
They just did.
They did.
Now you brought up Substack. Matt Taibbi's of the world and Tucker Carlson are doing well
Yep.
on their own, but not a lot of networks built out beyond the individual success.
Can I run an idea by you? You can tell me
Yeah.
what you think.
Yeah.
All right. So my thought is that media doesn't work in today's day and age because it has perverse incentives. It's an ad-based business that has as its consumer, theoretically, the reader. But because we read it for free, for the most part, the real consumer or client is the advertiser. And so the advertiser and the consumer are at odds. Almost always, because advertiser would like more pushing for conversion. Consumers like, stop bothering me with to buy stuff. And then, if you have to in any way, influence the news because you have an advertiser that doesn't want a news thing out, then you immediately lose trust. That's problematic. So I think there's like a business model issue there.
I have thoughts on that. But go ahead. I want to keep going.
So now I think that there actually might be some 21st century media companies that change this. An example might be, and not almost anything to do with their politics, but like a Daily Wire. So as I see Daily Wire launch companies, the companies are the revenue driver for the overall media business, like their chocolates, their razors, I don't know what else they've launched.
And the media property becomes the marketing mechanism for everything else.
Exactly. Then you don't have perverse incentives because you actually have alignment between your user base and your news. And you don't have third-party influence that are coming in and trying to influence you. So I'm curious to see what happens. So what do you think?
I think scale is always the hard part. So what I mean by that is this. So you're exactly right about the relationship with advertising and the listener, the viewer. And I would add a compounding problematic part of that is that the idea is for you on your YouTube or your Instagram or my YouTube or whatever, we want as many people watching as possible.
Yep.
So that makes us chase. The incentive, therefore, is for us to chase the lowest common denominator. Ultimately, that's where you get, right? I want more numbers, more numbers, more numbers. So what do? You lean into what works. And by the way, here's an advertiser that wants more numbers, more numbers, more numbers, making you... Now, we're in a new age where you have done a lot of amazing content. Joe Rogan does amazing content, on. And you get rewarded at some level. But I think for real quality content of some kind, it has to move to a subscription model.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
And it's hard because there's so much information that it's hard to get a consumer to pay. But like, I don't know, I have 4 or 5 Substacks that I send $5 a month to. Yeah. And I think if this is of value to people at some level, they begin to pay. It has to move in that direction. And then there is a model for advertising to fit into that on a more like a 30% part of the proposition. Yeah. So I know that I have an advertiser coming in. I know, and I'm excited about this. And we'll talk about it in the coming weeks because I legitimately wear their products.
Yeah, it's a huge difference.
It's like I will use this product when I tell this audience about it. I will be able to say, this is something that I use. And that should be a very expensive relationship for that advertiser because I really have this connection and I mean it to facilitate it. But it can't be the basis of my relationship with everybody watching. No. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. But I think, what I'd be curious your thought here too, but if I was you, what I'd be trying to do is get a little distributing equity too. Like for any advertiser that you bring on. Now you can't do it all the time because you can't eat equity. You got to have cash flow that comes in consistently. But like when you're a knowledge worker, let's say, and you're good, what are you actually? You're sales, right? Yes, your content, your marketing, your strategy, but also you're the pay-per-click, right, for this advertiser because you have a bunch of listeners. Well, if that's the case, then we know that like if a venture capital dollar goes out to a business, a startup, 40 cents of that venture capital dollar goes to Facebook, Amazon, Apple, right? That goes to ads. So that means 40% of it could instead go to somebody like you. And of every dollar that you bring in for them, you could ask for some portion of equity in the business. And then on a future basis, you continue to get annuitized on your revenue stream to them. You're super aligned because you're actually an owner in a business. And it's not that dissimilar from what Joe Rogan's done with some of his stuff. He's like, sure, I'll talk about on it, but I'm going to own part of the company that I talk about. And I'm only going to talk about 5 or 7 companies. And that I'm not out there going, you know, gummy hair care products and AG1 and whatever, because you had to do some due diligence on the individual
Well, I'll take you down to
companies.
the second floor when we're done here and see if you can tell my bosses about me taking
Exactly.
equity.
Yes. Perfect. I'm in.
Yeah. No, I've been really excited to meet you. As I said, like you're one of these mysterious people for me that hits my stream when you don't know how, but then I'm like, I really like what she's saying. And then I like another one and I get another one. I'm like, no, now I need to follow. You're really good.
Gotcha.
No, you're really good. You're like, I don't want to call you a modern day Warren Buffett, but you're talking about real value, real Main Street businesses and how people can get rich and also give back to their communities, which is singing my tune. So I was really excited to meet you. And we're both Texans.
I love that.
You're
Yeah,
Texan
well,
now, right? You're
yeah,
Texan now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Little Arizonan, little Texan, very similar,
Okay.
actually.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. So thank you, Codie. This has been great. I hope we
Thank-
can stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, Main Street Millionaire.